Next, we come to our media picks for the month. And this month, I think I'll get my media pick and an extra little thing out of the way, and then we'll move on to
Do.
yours. Um, my media pick of the month is a computer game. I could have picked a couple of different things this month.
You're choosing a computer game for your media pick. My God, I'm shocked.
It doesn't happen that often, but every now and then, yes, a computer game.
No, no.
And in this instance, it is, I'm a little bit behind the curve. It is a game from 2018 called God of War. It is the fourth, I think, game in the series based around a character called Kratos, who was made as a god of war in the Greek pantheon. Um, he's made
That's
up.
what it says in the box.
Yeah, yeah. He's not based on a real god. But crucially, in the first three games, he made his way through quite literally the pantheon. He had a problem with the gods, and he killed them all. In,
As you do.
as you do. In this one, and you know, I'd heard praise of this game for quite a while. When it came out, I didn't have a PlayStation 4 to play it. Um, and I saw it the other day going for a mere £10, and I figured I would give it a go. And I have loved this. It was praised initially because the game's creator and developer, is it Corey Barlog, and they said Balrog then Barlog. Corey has grown as a man, as a human being, as a man, and therefore his character has. He wasn't content to leave the character where it was as a nihilistic, selfish individual, and instead the character is now a father. And this has plays into the way that the game plays out, in so much as it's a story initially all about the mother of Kratos' child has just died, and they're both putting her on a pyre, so they're taking her ashes to the top of the nearest mountain. That takes about 2 or 3 hours to do. Uh, and then you realise, oh, this game is much bigger than that. So I've been delighted by the size of the story, and in that sense, actually, my lovely wife has been watching me play. Um, and I say watching me play in so much as she,
That
as
must
a
be exciting for her.
well, no, actually, it is. In so much as so she in her first academic life was a classicist, and she has commented on how this story feels like an epic. The way it's playing out, it feels like, like the sort of, Perseus or whatever, going to do one thing, and actually the story ends up being much bigger. Uh, so that's one element of the reason why I'm praising this game and highlighting it. But the other thing as well is not just the emotional content, and it is an emotional, heartfelt story. Incidentally, told with one camera angle as well. People who play computer games regularly will know that often games will have gameplay sections and then a cut scene, and then it'll go back to a gameplay section. This is very common. In this game, it's seamless and it never changes angle. So it's almost as though the camera's just following you round. And so if something heartfelt is happening, it comes around and looks at the face and the two people are talking, then it'll go back behind Kratos' shoulder to go back into gameplay. So that's it adds to the sense that you are on the adventure with him. But crucially, the thing that I've really enjoyed has been the way that they have seamlessly mapped this into Norse mythology. So the idea is that he murdered he murdered the Greek pantheon more or less, and then moved to Scandinavia to get away from that. It was living more or less as a mortal, or as close to a mortal as he could, and now has well, actually, let's do a little quiz for you. Do you know which of the pantheon of Norse gods is likely to be invulnerable to almost everything in Midgard?
If I remember rightly, wasn't it Baldur who was only responsible, only vulnerable to mistletoe?
Well done. 10 points for you, Mr. Brookman. Yes, so Boulder comes to the door, and what's great is that he doesn't announce himself. It's not clear who this person is. He's just actually a really quite a weirdo. He's a bit of a strange person covered in tattoos, just going, "Hello, where's your son?" Because there's family implications going on. I won't say who Kratos' wife is, but she's tied into Norse mythology. Um, and what's really beautiful about it is that it's a moment of intrigue as to why. Kratos cannot kill this man. You know, like because they have a fight. It's a massive epic set piece, and he just won't die. And it's because it's Boulder, and Boulder is invulnerable to almost everything. Mistletoe is his key weakness, and that does. I think it will come into play in this game. It's been hinted at already by now. Um, and then as you move through the landscape, you meet the world serpent. There's lots of little stories all over the place. There's some additions to the lore as
Yeah.
well, which are okay. They're fine, you know. But actually, as a very passive light primer for Norse mythology, uh, this is okay. I would say. I would say it's pretty good fun. And I'm not. Don't get me wrong. Don't do this instead of studying, for example, God forbid, Anglo-Saxon, Norse, and Celtic. Um, but definitely, it, I would say that there's an enjoyable experience to be had here, both in terms of story, in terms of gameplay, but also actually in terms of little tidbits of Norse mythology. I've been enjoying it, and I think I'm only about halfway through. I've been playing it for a good few days now. Well, in total, not solid.
Right. No, that's interesting. I mean, obviously, recently we've seen the um, the Assassin's Creed games become more and more sophisticated in terms of
Hmm.
their depictions of past cultures
Hmm.
and so on. And it's how um, the there's this crossover between um I suppose the huge sandbox games like Morrowind
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so on, which tend to be a bit sort of Tolkienish
Hmm. Hmm.
in terms of their inspirations.
Hmm.
But then these games which are taking a more direct inspiration from that sort of cultural
Hmm.
those sort of cultural traditions
Well,
and folklores.
and in that sense, arguably, uh, a game like God of War is to Norse mythology as Tolkien is to Norse mythology. Arguably, the Lord of the
Mm.
Rings, Silmarillion, The Hobbit drew upon that
Yeah,
that mythology in a very similar way, in so much as there are, um, yeah, there are there's a well, if you just look at the movies and the Return of the King, the movie, when Aragorn is giving his great speech about a time when bonds are broken and shields are shattered, but it is not this day. This day we fight. All this kind of thing. That he's basically describing Ragnarok. He's describing a Norse. Concept of the end of days, and also crucially the death of the gods. And actually, I suppose just one final point I would make about this as well is that what I've always found beautiful about Norse mythology in particular is the fact that these are gods who are fated to die. I find that kind of beautiful. In so much as there's not many mythologies where
yeah,
all of the gods are going to die, and that will be the end of the world. Often, uh, I think it says something interesting about in the same way that founding myths tell you something about a culture. For example, the fact that there's a great big cow that turns up at the beginning of time in Norse mythology tells you something about their attachment to farming. I think the idea that they existed in a world where their gods were fated, destined, um, was it tells you something about the way they must have viewed the world as well. So I find that quite poetic. I've always found that interesting. I suppose in so much as, for example, the a modern, say, Christian comparison would be, um, uh, uh, you know, uh, um, what's the word, rapture, and there being, I think, what's described in Revelation, a new heaven and a new earth. But there's no question as to whether or not there will be a continuity of the deity in that instance, if that's what I mean. So God will be on top all the way through that, and then things will change below. In Norse mythology, it's heavily implied, although again some of this stuff is a little bit grey around the edges. Heavily implied that everything ends, and then out of that, it's also implied there'll be something else that comes out of it, like a cycle or something. So um, anyway, it's fun, it's enjoyable, and
or a remake in the case of the Tolkien stories.
yeah. Well, actually, yeah, the TV series has come.
A
Yeah,
remake on Netflix or whatever it's going to,
where where where
whatever it's
where
going to be.
where crucially they're not allowed to do the Ring saga. Have you heard about that? The Netflix series, they're not allowed to touch the Ring, um,
Yeah.
because the Ring is, I think, it's owned by New Line Cinema. Anyway, I just, also can I just add on a little bit of movie news as well? This is the
Of
story.
course,
Thank
yes.
you, thank you. So I was going ahead without your permission then. This is the story that
Of course you are.
Steven Spielberg won't be
It's a
directing.
rhetorical question.
Steven Spielberg won't be directing Indiana Jones 5. Um, he stepped down apparently voluntarily. He's decided that he's just not the person to do this film, and James Mangold is in talks to replace him. Now, we discussed this obviously when we were putting this agenda together, and the reason why I'm mentioning this as a point of interest is that Mangold directed Logan, a superhero movie, all about the basically ending Hugh Jackman's,
With Hugh Jackman.
yeah, yeah, Hugh Jackman's run
Yeah,
as the character Wolverine. And what's beautiful about that film,
yeah.
one of the reasons why it was so popular, is that first of all, it's quite grim. Um, it's one of the grittiest versions of the character, which lots of people apparently were looking for from the movies. Um, but also, it's a story
Yeah.
of endings. It's the idea that, and he tackles this in terms of actually at the time when the movie came out, it was a comment on the genre as much as anything else. You know, these Marvel movies, the bubble will pop one day, as it were, and he was examining what happens at the end of a person's life, at the end of an idea's life, and at the inevitable come down of something which must fall. You know, so I'm not suggesting that I want to
Oh,
see.
hang on. So is the implication?
So go on. Yep.
I was going to say, is the implication here that the new film's going to see Indiana Jones at the International Criminal Court charged with cultural war crimes?
It could do. Who knows? It could do. Indiana Jones and The Hague or something like that. I don't know. Well,
Yes,
I don't know.
Indiana Jones at the Hague Tribunal. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But although there'll have to be a cutaway in the middle of the film saying 25 years
Well, actually,
later. Yeah, he's been arrested and
except
then
given that Harrison Ford, albeit is a very vigorous man in his '70s now,
I think so. Yeah,
he
yeah.
wouldn't. He could actually. He'd actually spend most of the movie sat in the dock, so he wouldn't actually have to do a load of stunts or anything anymore.
Well, this is entirely possible. Uh, you completely distracted
Indiana
me.
Jones and the Flying List. Oh no, sorry, I didn't say
Indeed.
that.
At the moment, Harrison Ford is 77. He was born in 1942. But the reason, sorry, but the reason why I find it interesting is that Mangold found a very elegant way to ask big, broader questions about a genre, but also to tell a story, which is actually quite small, about a person who's had an extraordinary life and that life coming to an end. Um, I don't know. I don't. I'm not. As I was just about to say, I'm not. I'm not saying I want to see Indiana Jones die in this film, and I'm not saying that I want to see some of the rawer elements that were in Logan,
Yes.
for example, in this movie.
Yeah.
But it's nice that
Yeah.
Mangold embraces endings, which is actually unfashionable in Hollywood. You know, sequelitis, as it's called, is often the name of the game. But it'd be nice actually if this is an
Be
ending.
interesting. Actually, it's interesting to. Yeah, be interesting to see where they can take it, because obviously we had the in the most recent in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and we asked the question as always: is it canonical or is it an outlier?
Sorry, what was that? Sorry, what?
I was going to say
Most recent Indiana
we asked the
Jones film?
question. Yes, in the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, is it a canonical film or is it an
I'm not
outlier?
quite sure what you're talking about. Sorry, what was that?
Exactly. Allegedly there was another Indiana Jones film that some people won't acknowledge, which dealt with the 50s obsessions of the Cold War and UFOs and nuclear annihilation and nuclear paranoia, and the McCarthy witch hunts. So it alluded to a lot of political
Hmm.
contemporary politics in amongst the comic strip fun and games.
Hmm.
Where do you go after that into the 60s? Does Indy embrace the counterculture and grow his hair and you know um,
Possibly, possibly. I think, as you say, that is part of the challenge, and maybe actually one of the challenges
yeah.
uh, will be um, well, I guess in that sense, if talking about death of genres, it will be the fact that by the 60s and 70s, TV was replacing cinema serials, in so
Indeed.
much as people weren't going and paying that Nickelodeon money in quite the same way that they were in the 40s and 50s to see to see a nickel short film. Um, and so again, I think there are interesting questions to ask and answer there. Also, I should just briefly say I do accept Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as canon. I was only joking, but what I think what was disappointing about that film excuse me, for me personally, there were two things. First of all, I think they broke their tradition of Indy's relationship to the mysterious. In every other Indiana Jones adventure, Indy has been present for the supernatural denouement. You know, the deadly thing that occurs. In Raiders, he was, close your eyes, Marion, don't look at it. You know, this kind of thing when everyone else was looking into the box. In Temple of Doom, he was there when the stones came alive in his bag and burned through and fell into the river. And in The Last Crusade, he drank from the cup and saw everything. You know, he saw Donovan die. In he saw the temple come apart, and then they rode off into the sunset. In
Yeah.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Indy is not present for the aliens uh, sucking up Spalko's soul through her eyes, Kate Blanchett. Yet
Yeah.
we, as the audience, see it. And I know this is a very specific thing to pick up on, but I think that's actually one of the ways in which the film didn't feel right, is that it was no longer Indy's adventure at that point. You know, he was escaping the temple while she was, tell me more, tell me, I want to know everything. And then the aliens kind of killed her or whatever, or she exploded with that alien knowledge. Um, so it's not fourth wall breaking, but the structure of the drama was broken. It's like having a Harry Potter story where we see something that Harry Potter hasn't seen, if you know what I mean. Um, the other thing as well is that when they were writing that film, it feels as though George Lucas completely forgot the connections between this movie and, for example, the Young Indiana Jones TV series. Um, there's a very particular episode where young Indy meets effectively people who are like him in Crystal Skull, old war dogs, you know, who've lived a life. I think it's in South Africa. I think it might be the Boer War from memory. Um, but the point is that Lucas had hinted at Indy's destiny previously, and now I'm getting very nerdy. I can see even you're shutting down here a little bit. But they'd hinted at his destiny previously, and actually in that series they also hint that he ends up as an old man living in Chicago playing the saxophone. I think, um, certainly with a beard. Anyway, but they didn't really fully pay that hint off in this film. Instead, they kind of they retrod the same ground without really thinking about canon, as it were. It was just a bit too
Yeah.
separated, and also I think as they broke the narrative structure, the conventions of the Indiana Jones adventure. So maybe Mangold will be aware of that and be able to fix
Be
it.
interesting to see as well what kind of audience they go for, because the traditional indie audience, I guess, or at least the first indie audience, the audience that made indie the cultural icon that he is, are people my age,
Yeah.
who are approaching retirement, as would be a kind way of putting it.
Well, not with this
And,
resolution.
okay, the 50s are the new 30s, but it's interesting how these movies are pitched these days.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Often at specific audiences, and often um, and it strikes me that because it's likely to be an ending,
Hmm.
we're not looking at something like J.J. Abrams taking on Star Wars, where it's going to be it's a reboot, it's a re-energizing of the franchise.
Oh, well, see, that's the other thing as well. I mean, inevitably they're going to have some sort of it's Disney. Yeah, they don't want it to end. So they're going to have
No,
some
no,
sort
of
of
course they
passing
don't.
of the
Yeah,
torch. There's going to be something. But in
yeah,
terms of how they handle Jones and Harrison Ford's
yeah.
role in these films, I think Mangold will be able to to bring it in for a landing. I hope anyway. I hope. Anyway, that's gone on for way
Do,
longer
do,
than I
do,
thought
do,
it
do you
would.
think? No, no, it's okay.
Okay.
Just one last question on that. Do you
Uh,
think it's going to involve casting sheer beef again?
um, I I don't know. Do you know what you think? Somehow I found myself watching interviews with Shia LaBeouf recently, and he's all right. He's an all right guy. It's not his fault how he's told to behave in films. So in Transformers and also in Crystal Skull. I think the directing was the problem. He seems all right. I think if they can bring him in a way that's not going to have him swinging from vines like Tarzan, I think he'll be happy, and I think I'll be happy to watch it. Um, but yeah, so I thought this was meant to be just like mentioning, but there's just some, I just there's so much to unpack there in terms of what I think Mangold might achieve, and in the context of also arguably the failure of the previous movie. Because actually, I should also say, sorry, we went to a midnight screening of Crystal Skull, my wife and I. We this was before we were married. We'd just met, and that was one of the first things we
And
did
she still
together.
married you.
Yeah, yeah. We went to a midnight screening, and I was in this. I've heard it described as phantom menacing, where people come out of a film and they go, yeah, that was all right. That was all right, wasn't it? That was okay. That was okay. Yeah, was it? Was it okay? Yeah, I think it was okay. And then over the next 6 months, you slowly uh, stop trying to convince yourself that it was
You
okay.
realise what a pile of tosh it was.
Yeah, and actually on the evening, so as we were coming out of the cinema, this was in Durham, the Odeon thing there. Um, my wife sort of heard a few people next, so my then girlfriend heard people next to her sort of saying, "Well, that was a waste of time, wasn't it? And waste of money or whatever." At 1 o'clock in the morning, and yeah, so it's a little milestone in our relationship. Hopefully, if there is a midnight, I don't know, I might not risk the midnight showing this time. I might just go to a regular showing. I think, yeah. Anyway, we talked for long enough about this. I'm sorry, went on for far too long. Uh, Horrible histories, Andy. Tell me more.
Okay, this is going to be really short, actually.
Yeah.
It's it just about creeps into this month because although it was famously broadcast for the 31st of January for Britain leaving the European Union.
Hmm.
The row that ensued extended well into February, and it's the Horrible Histories compilation of songs that relate to Britain's relationship with Europe, and in particular, a song called "British Things,"
Okay.
which involves a Queen Victoria having a cup of tea and a servant explaining how all the things that go towards making this cup of tea actually come from other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And for example, sugar is a Caribbean imported. For sugar, your cup of tea, slavery's been supported, is one of the lines.
Okay. Okay.
And
Well,
I know it's wrong, Your Majesty.
and actually, at the time, because we were talking about Wilberforce earlier in this watching brief,
Yeah,
at the time, people were abstaining from sugar, weren't they, as a protest against slavery?
indeed,
Yeah,
indeed.
yeah,
As the song goes on to say, I know it's wrong, Your Majesty, but slaves in Africa worked hard in fields of sugar cane, to sweeten up your char.
yeah.
Um, and it concludes, and this is what really got people annoyed on the, shall we say, on the Brexity wing of British
Hmm.
politics, which is
Hmm.
why the reason why I've chosen this. Um, British things, British things. I thought that they were many. British things. Afraid there's hardly any.
Oh,
Um,
oh, eesh. Okay.
uh, and it basically, it when it went out, it caused an absolute Twitter storm on
Yeah.
on the Brexity wing of British politics.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Andrew Roberts, the Conservative historian, said, "There's a stream of bigoted hatred directed against this country. These sneering attitudes to all things British shouldn't be forced down the throats of children by the BBC."
Yeah.
And you know, there was even there's a serious point. There was a video refuting it, called Nish Kumar's Horrible Inaccuracies,
Oh, okay.
which by well, it's the Akkad Daily. It's Sargon of Akkad, is the right wing friend of Tommy Robinson, and
Yeah.
tries to portray himself as a comedian.
Yeah.
but and if you look at the below the line comments on this, which was supposedly refuting the uh, basically the gags in the song, it's a parade of racist prejudice, actually, particularly aimed at Nish Kumar, who presented the program. And say that was just one of a number of songs, including there's a good one about William the Conqueror as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it was a piece of like what I like about it and why people should just look it up, and we'll post the video below.
uh-huh.
Is it actually said in a very pithy, very approachable way what a lot of academics are saying about the need to acknowledge, for example, the negative sides of the British Empire and Britain's involvement in the slave trade and so
Yeah.
on, and that Britain's economic power in the 18th and early 19th century was often based on things we'd rather not think about too much. It's inconvenient to the national myth,
Yeah.
and so I'm all in favour of pricking balloons about the national myth.
Reforming and reshaping the national myth. And growing it, adding to it, augmenting it, I suppose, is another way of putting that.
And winding up Brexit.
The thing, do you know what? The really weird thing is, Andy, is that I find myself all too often in these discussions as the person who's trying to kind of, it's okay, come with us, come along with us, and yet you're right. I mean, in my private life, I'm more than happy to try and wind people up, but at the same time, uh, as a responsible. Public archaeologist, I also want to highlight that. I mean, yes, you're right. On the one hand, it is a necessary unmaking of mythology, um, but also, I suppose, knowing Nish Kumar and also obviously the Horrible Histories crew and their songs, this is a very pithy, tongue-in-cheek way of saying that yes, okay, there's nothing that's actually British, but also at the same time, Britishness is a lot of stuff, you know, and that has had connotations for what we were talking about in terms of the term Anglo-Saxon, in terms of some of the other stuff we've talked about this month. What is Britishness? That's one of the more difficult questions to answer, and some people like to have simple answers to that question, but the truth is the question is it's well very complicated, and it's beautiful because of it as well, I think. Um, sorry, have I
Absolutely,
completely undermined your anarchy
not
there?
at all. No, no, no. The serious, and there's a there is a serious point about it, and it extends the whole horrible histories oeuvre.
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but certainly I've discovered, when I work with children, young people, quite how influential the horrible histories has been in terms of being a gateway drug to history
Yeah,
for a lot
well,
of kids,
it was one of my gateway
and
drugs.
they've
So go ahead.
absolutely, and it's been, it's had a fantastic and very positive
Mm.
influence, and the TV series is very smart, very cleverly written, very well performed. But I mean, again, people who enjoy the slightly satirical edge to it, the Battle of Britain Pilots as a boy band is a great one, and
Oh, literally, that's another one. The song literally. Have you seen that or heard that one?
yeah,
That's very good.
yes,
Yeah, literally. Yeah, it's very
yeah.
good.
Yeah, exactly. They're very clever. And great fun, but often making a serious point and a point worth making too.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think in terms of approachability and doing your research and then being able to present it to an audience in a popular way, us who style ourselves as academics could learn a lot from it sometimes. British Things tells you as much about the decolonialisation of British history as any paywall article in a paywall journal.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Yeah, history with the horrible and factual bits left in. Yes.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, it's been another month. We've made it through. And also, I should say, for the record, because for people keeping score, our viewer will know, often we have technological problems. This month, well, with one little exception, nothing. No, well, that wasn't even a technological problem. That was me spluttering my lines. So we've done well. 2 months in a row with no restarts, no internet, malarkey. It's been good. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely, no, astonishing. Thank you,
there you
God, thank you, Mr. Skype. Thank you, Microsoft. My God, yeah.
I wouldn't go that far.
It's,
I wouldn't go that far. Every time I open
no,
Microsoft or
actually, no, I wouldn't go that
open
far
Skype,
either.
it changes my settings. But also,
Yeah,
I suppose what I
yeah,
should say is for the coming month, look after yourself. Obviously, living in London, lots of potential for bugs being passed around. Here in Newcastle, we recently had the first confirmed local resident who hasn't recently travelled has got it, and apparently at the moment, the suggestion is we're not quite sure who passed it on to them. So that's a concern. As they would say in a Hollywood movie, the virus is here. So it's going to be a challenging few months ahead, but hopefully we will be able to
yeah.
continue with our watching brief. Um,
I'm sure.
Thank you for your time, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you. See you next
Yeah,
time.
will do, and thank you guys for watching. Bye bye.